Hi, everyone. I wanted to do just a brief discussion about the three branches of government. In the United States, provided by the Constitution, we have three equal branches of government. We have the legislative branch, they make the laws, they control the spending. We have the executive branch, in charge of the military, in charge of enforcing the laws. And then we have the judicial branch, who's in charge of interpreting the laws. I thought the law meant that, you thought the law meant that. And the judicial branch makes that interpretation. They don't make laws, they don't control spending. The president doesn't control spending. He doesn't make laws. Congress makes laws, they control the spending, but each of these branches control each other. So I want to talk just briefly about that. How does the legislative branch, Congress, that's the Senate and the House of Representatives, how do they control the president? How do they control the Supreme Court? The legislative branch can control the president by overriding anything he vetoes. So he may say, I don't like that law, I veto it. And Congress, with a two-thirds vote, can override that veto and still make something law, even though the president doesn't want to. Congress can also remove the president from office. They also must approve presidential appointees and treaties. They control the judicial branch by passing a constitutional amendment to overturn something. For example, if we've all heard of Citizens United, which basically says corporations are people, so they can contribute unlimited money into campaigns. And you see what this has gotten us, the Elon Musk type people. So if we wanted to override that, we couldn't just say two-thirds vote, it's overridden. It's a bigger deal. It takes a constitutional amendment. So you can put in a constitutional amendment that passes through Congress and it says, all right, Citizens United no longer exists. It is overturned. So Congress can override the president and remove him. They can override findings by the Supreme Court, but must do it through a constitutional amendment. So Congress has some control over the other two branches. Let's go to the president, the executive branch. Does he have control over the other two branches? He can veto anything that comes out of Congress. Congress has a law, he doesn't like it, he vetoes it. Now, Congress can come back with the two-thirds vote and override that veto, but when it first comes out of Congress, if the president doesn't like it, he can veto it. He also gets to appoint all the federal judges, Supreme Court justice and all other federal judges. He can grant pardons and those types of things as well. So the president has some control over Congress. He has some control over the judicial branch. The judicial branch can declare laws unconstitutional. That's how they control Congress. They said Congress passes a law that says, hey, if you're over 7 feet tall, you don't have to pay taxes. The judicial branch can come back and say that's unconstitutional, and therefore it's not a law. They can control the president in the same way. The president can say, hey, I have done something through executive action, and they can say that is unconstitutional. You need to undo that. So these three branches are ingeniously intertwined. They can control each other. And this is considered, the term is checks and balances. Let me tell you what happens when this breaks down. Let's suppose president passes a law that says anyone over the president through decree, okay, executive order, anyone over 7 feet does not pay taxes. Well, Congress could say, you know, we think we are going to override that. Okay. We are going to say that that is not a law. We're going to use our two-thirds majority and reject that executive order. This only works if Congress is willing to do this. All right. If Congress is not willing to do this, can the judicial branch stop the president from doing something? The judicial branch can look at this and say, hey, we think that that is non-constitutional. That executive order about the 7 foot tall people, non-constitutional. It can't be a law. So that works, except the there's no the judicial branch has no military. They have no way of enforcing what they say. So the president can simply ignore them if he wants to. That would be an unconstitutional act on his part. But if he does it, who's going to say something? So let's take a couple of examples of this. Let's take these tariffs. For Trump to put in tariffs, he has to declare on his own to executive order. I mean, he can ask Congress to pass tariff laws, and Congress could do that. But on his own, the president can put in tariffs if there's an economic emergency. So all he has to do is go, emergency. That's all it takes. Nothing else. He just says, in my gut, I feel there's an economic emergency. I'm going to put in these tariffs. So Congress should right away say, hey, we're in charge of spending. We're in charge of that type of thing. And you're taking control of something we're in charge of. We're going to vote on that. And if we get a 2/3 vote in Congress, we will overturn those tariffs. Actually, it doesn't even take a 2/3 vote. It could take a majority vote. This is how it would work. If Congress had a majority vote, 50% plus one goes through the Senate and the House, and it says there is no emergency. There is no economic emergency. Therefore, those tariffs are null and void. Congress could do that. Trump could then come back and say, I'm going to veto what you just did. And Congress could come back to him and say, okay, you want to play that game? We're going to override you by a 2/3 vote, and therefore there are no tariffs. So there is a way to control this. But you'll notice it takes some action by Congress to make this happen. It doesn't just happen automatically. And right now, where Congress is at, is that they won't even allow it to go to vote. Okay, so they voted simple majority in the Senate to take control of some of these tariffs, and it went to the House of Representatives, and the Speaker of the House wouldn't even let it be brought to vote. He wouldn't even let it be brought up for discussion. So the House is abdicated. They basically said whatever the president wants to do on this issue, at least he gets to do it. So let's take a look at the judicial branch. What's happened with them recently? Well, there's two things that come up on the judicial branch recently. One is uh, the Trump administration accidentally deported an El Salvadorian that was in the United States legally, accidentally sent him back to El Salvador to a high security prison. And it turns out that everyone that was going to that prison was supposed to be a gang member, and it turns out that 90% of them have no criminal record. Anyway, this particular person stuck out because he didn't even have a tattoo. He had a tattoo, but it had nothing to do with gangs. And they said that's why we think he's a gang member, is he's got a tattoo and he's not white enough, that type of thing. So it goes all the way up to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, you deported this guy illegally, which you admit to. And now we are telling you, the Supreme Court, that you have to go get him. And Trump has basically said, I'm not going to do that. So he's just ignoring the Supreme Court. They're trying to wordsmith what the Supreme Court said, but it's pretty obvious of what they're doing. So he's ignoring the Supreme Court. And another one is the Associated Press a few weeks back said, we're not going to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America just because the president says to. And Trump said, okay, you don't have to, but you can't come to any of my press briefings and you can't ride on Air Force One with the rest of the press. So the Associated Press took this to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court told the president, you have to give them access, equal access that you give everyone else to the White House. And the White House has ignored that completely. So what we have here is a series of different things going on where the president of the United States is doing this, doing that, doing that, doing that, and Congress has abdicated their responsibility to bring him in line with what the Constitution says. And when it goes to the Supreme Court instead of the Congress, Supreme Court's been doing their job and the president has just ignored them. So we have somebody that's a president that's ignoring the Constitution, and we have one of the branches of government has just abdicated their responsibility to hold them in check. So that's where we are. That's the three branches of government. And this is ingenious the way they were put together. And it's also surprising how easy it was for this ingenuity to completely fall apart when one part of that government, I'm talking to the House of Representatives, does not do their job. That's it for today. Thanks.